we're basically the same person, um, different continent, different. Um, because I have the Substack just, well, mostly to vent, to maintain my sanity, and explain what I think is obvious. Like, if you've really thought this through for long enough, you should get to this point. Can I just
Yeah.
explain it to you and help you get there? All right, let's try an intro and see where we go. We can just wing it, mate. Welcome back to the podcast. Should I welcome you back to Fresh Economic Thinking or Home Economics? Because this week, something special, a joint conversation with Aziz Sunderji, founder of Home Economics. Welcome, Aziz.
Thank you, Cameron. Thanks for having me.
We thought
And
we'd take
and
the
and, and Cameron,
opportunity. Yeah.
thank you for doing this with me because part of the goal here is for me to talk to your audience, but also for you to talk to my audience. So, Cameron, welcome to Home Economics.
Thank you. Yes, exactly. We thought it was a good chance. As we said before the program, we kind of live parallel lives, analyzing housing markets from opposite sides of the globes, and we thought it's time to just understand what we're both up to, introduce the each other's analysis to our audiences. So, do you remember when we first met, Aziz?
Yeah, so I was trying to remember this. I think I emailed you years ago as I was getting more into the housing market and doing my own analysis and kind of getting gradually more frustrated with the sort of conventional views about what's happening in housing. Is there a crisis? If there is one, what's the nature of it? What's causing it? What some of the solutions might be? And I found kind of you had some pretty good explanations that aligned nicely with my nascent analysis. And as I did more analysis and more thinking and kind of learned all the characters out there in the housing market, I found myself just kind of agreeing more and more with your view. I probably don't agree with everything you say, but that's probably healthy. And I feel like we're kind of simpatico in the way that we think about housing and what's actually going on. Maybe that's our sort of shared background in the financial, or in your case, the housing, the business of housing. I'm not sure why we share this. Maybe we're just kind of like outsiders and cranks. But in any case, I think we've kind of I've just found kind of we're philosophically aligned, and it's been really nice to be able to bat ideas back and forth with you. And yeah,
Yeah. And your background is in finance, right? I think that's important because there's a small group of us like-minded people who think about housing
yeah,
like we think about all assets in the economy. And
yeah.
when you do that, you do converge to a similar view to what we both hold. So what is your background, Aziz?
Yeah, let me talk about my background for your audience, and I'd love for you to talk a bit about yours for
Mm,
my audience, and for those of my readers who are not familiar with your work, Cameron. So my background is in finance. I worked at an investment bank, Barclays Investment Bank, for 15 years. I started off in London and then came to New York. I worked as a strategist the entire time, mostly covering the bond markets, European bond markets, and Latin America and emerging Europe. Um, my role was to analyze markets, the path of economies, think about bonds, recommend trade ideas, and advice to the world's largest and supposedly most sort of sophisticated institutional investors. So you're very much right. When I came into the housing world, I thought about this as an asset, and I tried to apply a lot of that sort of asset pricing toolkit to housing, and I was surprised to see that you were one of the few people that was thinking about it the same way. What and your background is? Yeah, can you talk about your background?
So I used to work in property development and identifying sites, running feasibilities for a major residential and retirement village company, and then an industrial developer. And then I've worked in public policy in the state government, and I actually did a PhD in economics looking at grey corruption and political favoritism, in which the property market featured quite heavily. And so, yeah, I've always thought of housing as an asset, as an investment. And I always tell people, when was running feasibilities uh, in property development, when the council upzoned or changed the rules, I didn't go and put my prices down in my feasibility, right? Nobody expected that change to result in lower prices, even if it changed what got built where. And yet, when I entered the public conversation on housing, all the assumptions were the opposite. So that's my background. So you've come from finance, as is, and what are you building with Home Economics? It's predominantly a newsletter, right? But you've got lots going on.
Yeah.
Tell my audience.
Yeah, so I just got really bored with the bond market after doing it for a long time. I wanted to write for a bigger audience and a bit more interesting stuff. I love data visualization and data analysis, and there's so many different things you can apply that to. And
And
why bonds?
let me assure everyone, your visualizations, your diagrams, mapping, your charts are exceptional, and they often make me jealous when you come up with a great chart. And I always think, oh, why didn't I think of that first? That's a brilliant way to present the data. So, yeah, they're definitely very shareable, and you're getting some traction. I just want to point that out. Go on,
Yeah,
please.
thank you. That's true. Yeah. It's been a really nice thing that to sort of to have people sort of recognize that I'm slightly obsessed with data visualization. And I wanted to do that. I mean, I was kind of obsessed with data viz when I was back in finance, but it's not a big part of the job typically. And I want to do more of it.
Mm.
So I left the bank and kind of set out to just produce. I didn't really know what I was going to do, but I just felt the need to write. So and Substack had just come along, so I started writing on Substack. And I got a pretty nice reception. And started writing about all kinds of stuff, especially the things that I knew more about from my finance background, the macroeconomy and inflation and unemployment and labor market. I just got really interested in housing. I'd always been interested in housing, and there was an overlap with my background because of the sort of asset nature of housing. And it as a data guy, as a data visualization guy, there is just so much data to visualize. And housing has a sort of a tangible physical aspect to it. You can map things, for example. A lot of what I do is
Mm.
mapping. So the opportunities for doing great data visualization were there, and I thought that there were some other reasons that focusing on housing would be a good sort of beat to take, if you will. I think of myself kind of as a mix between a journalist and a research person, and I kind of thought about picking a beat and a specialty, and housing seemed the best one, not only because of the data viz opportunities, but it's interesting. Housing is interesting from like the man on the street to Blackstone. And
Mhm.
it's perennially interesting. Like I also thought about focusing on crypto, 8 years ago, and I'm glad I didn't because I
Yeah.
think it's the interest in crypto has ebbed and flowed. But housing, the New York Times has a real estate section. So does the Wall Street Journal. So does the Financial Times. I'm sure your papers in Australia have them as well. And that speaks to how
We're
it's
obsessed,
broadly
mate. We're
interesting
obsessed.
and
Mm.
interesting over time. As I got more into it, I also felt that the sophistication with which people talk about it um, was it's very funny to me. Housing is a really funny thing where it's actually very complicated. This will be a theme of what I'm going to say here. I think, look, repeatedly, it's extremely complicated. I think housing is very, very complicated, but everybody's talking about it. And so you find a lot of people who are expressing very strong views
Mm.
that are kind of that don't really acknowledge the corpus of decades of work of economists talking about this topic. They just kind of say, "Oh, housing's simple. It's Econ 101." And as I got into it, I was like, "Wow, this is not, I've done Econ 101 and 201 and 301, and it's not Econ 101. It's actually very, very complicated." And so I got really excited by the idea of, I don't know, the prospect of being able to produce some work that might move the needle, that might stand out from what everyone else was saying. And maybe that was also is that your attraction partly in writing a Substack, and maybe you can also talk about in answering that question what you're
Mm.
doing over there with your kind of you're not just Substack is the public front, I feel, for something bigger that
Mm.
you've got going on, this sort of think tank that you're building.
Yeah. That's funny you say that. Yeah, I'd like to think I've presented the idea that there is some kind of bigger think tank that's not just me in this room, but that is the ambition. I've definitely, uh, I'm doing the slow burn approach, gradually trying to find like-minded thinkers and see how we can fund ourselves. That might take a while, but yeah, it is the front. I was actually blogging. I'd written something like 700 articles between 2008 and 2020 on my own, back when blogging was cool, simply because I was frustrated. I'd worked in the government, I'd worked in academia, and I was doing a PhD, and that was just my outlet. And and the honest reason for Substack is just during COVID, the censorship sort of uh, got pretty heavy in Australia. So I thought I'm going to try and collect emails from my audience on the blog. So I'll switch to Substack, and then at least I can keep that going. But it's been a great tool to publish and promote ideas and share ideas. And I guess for me, it's been a continuous line for 20 years,
Mhm.
writing about housing. And I guess the embarrassing part for me, when you said before housing's more complicated, the longer I sort of analyze the market and understand it, the more I realize it's kind of not that complicated. There are just conflicting financial interests like any side of the market. Those who own houses want prices and rents to go up, and those who don't want them to come down until such time as they own houses. And then you've got geographic political competition around housing and where people go, and the conflict between cities and regions. And so I think the complexity arises somewhat intentionally by interest groups. And if you take that 20-year journey that I've taken trying to cut through, I think it is somewhat simple, but it's not. What's a good word? I'm sure there's a catchy phrase here. It's simple if you have the right foundational ideas, and it's complex if you don't have them and you're trying to make it seem more complex.
Hmm.
And for example, our commonality of houses are an asset, so pricing emerges like any other asset based on risks and returns. That is a foundational idea that keeps getting ignored from groups who want to pretend it's not and say, "Oh, supply will solve this," and almost pretend that their financial interest is not what it is. So, for example, when
Hmm.
property developers say, "Oh, upzone this, it'll make all the prices go down," you think, "Well, hang on, what interest group lobbies to change the rules to make the price of their product go down and have more competitors?" The taxis don't do that. The pharmacies don't do that. No one does it. But property developers, oh, our saviors, the only selfless industry group. Like we need to look through that, and then we get to the other side. So fresh economic thinking is just saying, look, let's start fresh with the right foundational concepts, and then we can understand a lot more stuff. Let's try and get through all that garbage that gets thrown around. So
Hmm.
what I do is I just write something weekly to explain and bring people along for the journey, or I release a podcast, and that's sort of the front. Like I stay in business by actually consulting and charging people for my time and my analysis. And this year, I've started doing intensive workshops on housing and land economics.
Yeah.
So I just ran one in June, a 2-day workshop. It's hands-on, it's all activities, it's got all the data, and that's where I sort of pass on those lessons that took me 20 years to learn, to
Hmm.
hopefully give people a shortcut for understanding housing without having to go through all of what I went through. So
Yeah.
that's
Although
that's
maybe,
what I'm building.
yeah, maybe you have to go through that pain to really understand it. I don't know. Maybe it's a circular thing. Maybe you think it's simple, and then you go through like the valley of uncertainty, which is where I am now, and come out on the other end thinking it's simple again. I don't know. But we should also mention that you published a book, The Housing Hijack, which is a great book. I read it a couple of years ago. There it is.
Yeah.
And that kind of that's a good dose of Cameron Murray's philosophy right there. I wanted to ask you quickly about writing a book,
Hmm.
and let's talk about me again. Um, I
Great.
don't know, I don't know where home economics is going. Like you, I pay the bills, which are substantial because I live in Manhattan, by doing consulting work. So I help mostly large tech and finance companies work with their data, analyze it, come up with insights, communicate that internally, externally, and do great data visualization. But housing is becoming more consuming for me. And I wanted to ask you about your experience writing a book quickly. I bet
Yeah.
many people, I feel like everybody thinks they should write a book about something. And I feel like your answer here might be interesting to a whole broad range of people. How was your experience writing that book? Did you did you enjoy it? Was it profitable? Did it build your reputation as you might have hoped?
Uh, to answer that, I'm going to start with my first book, which was called Game of Mates.
Hmm.
And the motivation for that was I did a PhD on political favoritism and grey corruption. And in that process, I'd written a bunch of academic papers, and there's a certain type of analysis that's needed for academic papers. But I had this corpus of work that I'd done that had gone nowhere because it wasn't quite able to be analyzed the way you'd expect in academic work. And I'd developed a more coherent theory of political favoritism that is hard to just, you can't just write an academic paper and say, here's my theory of the world, unless you're already super famous, right? So after your Nobel Prize, you can then go, actually, you guys are all wrong. This is the new theory. But when you write a book, you can say whatever you want. And so books are more sort of free. They present more freedom for communicating ideas. So the first book was called Game of Mates, and I wrote it with my supervisor, Paul Freitas, my PhD supervisor, where we just put in everything I'd learned during my PhD that people should know about political favoritism in Australia. And we self-published it because we'd approached some publishers and they got very nervous when we said we're doing this, and they said, "Oh, you're going to name all these people and say all this stuff, and we're very worried about this." And we said, "We're professional writers. It's 2017. Let's just write it and print it and sell it." And it became a like mini cult book. I did lots of events and promo, and then a mainstream publisher approached me a few years later and said, "We think the book's great, but you should sort of refresh it, and we'll distribute it." And so we updated it, and it's now released under a new title called Rigged: How Networks of Mates Rip Off Everyday Australians. And the publishers, essentially, after writing about housing for a few years, were open to the idea. I said, "Look, I got another idea. I've been writing about housing for 20 years. I need to put down everything I've learned in the most coherent way I can, because people are saying absolute nonsense, basically." And so they were happy with that. Writing a book is, if you write a weekly article and you'd written 600 blogs before you moved to Substack and 20 academic papers, writing a book is not particularly taxing in any way. And in fact, it's quite there's a freedom to it, because all those things you want to say, you can piece them together wherever you want. But it does force you to be somewhat coherent, right? Like, chapters have to make sense and be consistent with each other. Financially, I don't think books are really worth anything, especially books in Australia where your audience is 20 million. I think the data is something like 2 million Australians bought a book in the last year, right? So if you remove all the pop culture, airport books, etc., your total addressable market's pretty small.
Yeah.
What it does do is it's more of a status symbol that lasts for the next decade. So if you want to say, "I've published these books and I'm an expert," and then you get paid speaking gigs or consulting gigs, that's where the value is. I've probably made $15,000 from the book, from the actual publication royalties and etc., which is not much considering the amount of writing effort. Like, if for a consulting job, if they said, "Can you produce something like this?" it's going to be at least 10 times that in terms of time and effort.
Yeah.
So that's sort of how books play out, in my view. If you're considering one, you've got to think of it as an intellectual project where you've got these ideas that have to get out somewhere, and as a sort of marketing, positioning yourself as a brand in the intellectual sphere, because it's not unless you write some kind of hit pop book, you don't make money on niche books. And my issue is my books are kind of technical, like they got quirky titles and they seem like pop science, but you actually learn a lot of economics, and I don't know if it's a bit much for some people. And I've learned, sorry, one thing I've learned that maybe we can reflect on is a lot of people don't want to learn economics. They don't want to change their view. The data, all your data, your charts and your maps, for me, it's great. I'm sort of persuaded the pattern's there, but a lot of people will actually use it as evidence to reinforce their view that's the opposite. Have you ever encountered that? Like, it's hard to persuade people to modify their view or change their view. I think it's a learnt skill.
It is really hard to change people's minds, and I've learned that over time. I also try to be aware of that in my own behavior. Like, I find myself constantly looking out for the flaw in a paper. If there's a paper whose headline I don't agree with, I'm looking for the flaw immediately, and I don't apply that kind of rigor to looking at something that you write. And I feel myself doing it, and I'm trying to not do that. And one of the projects I've worked on recently that I'm called, is this a good segue?
Sorry, I was just going to say, it's okay that you're not looking for the flaw in everything I write, because there is a team of 100 Yimbys all around the world who is spending all day looking for a flaw in everything I've written ever on the internet.
Yeah. By even associating myself with you, I'm putting myself in the crosshairs. I hope you appreciate that, Cameron.
Mate, I'm touched.
Hopefully someday I'll be reviled by as many Yimbys as you. To be fair, like, I don't want to be fair, one of the great things about writing a Substack, one of the great things about just putting lots of charts on Twitter, is that you get to talk to lots of people. And I have in the process of doing all of this, met a bunch of, or at least met virtually, a ton of people whose views I completely disagree with, and they disagree with me, but they're good people, and I've had really productive exchanges
Mm.
with them, and they have shifted my view. I have I've changed my view after some of those interactions. So yes, it's hard to change people's minds. One should be aware of that flexibility in oneself. Um, I I've kind of changed my. I'm still going to be producing, empirical analysis and saying, hey, this is what it says. It says that, um, young people own fewer homes than they did historically because the marriage rate has declined, and the marriage rate declining doesn't seem to have that much to do with rising home prices. It seems to have to do with other things, cultural and economic. I'm not going to shy away from writing that, but I'm not going to expect that. I'm going to expect that it's preaching to the converted. But I'm also going to try to work on things that just further the conversation and make hopefully make other people make myself smarter, but make other people smarter in the process.
Mm.
So one of the things I built recently is this kind of compendium of all the academic research. One of the things that like I'd love to get into a bit of what we've hinted at, you and I being kind of on the same page and being very, very frustrated with the sort of
Mm.
consensus view about housing, and we should probably talk a little bit about why like what's our beef. I will say that
Well,
one
let's
of yeah
yeah. Why don't you start by explaining what this compendium is? It's called the Great Housing Debate or something. What
the
did you
great
make?
the great debate. I was going to call it
Debate.
the great housing hijack, but that name was already taken, so I'm calling it the
Yeah.
great debate. Yes, so one of my you people disagree with me all the time. People disagree with each other all the time, especially on social media. But the thing, none of I mostly like some comments are smarter and make me think, and some are just not that smart. The thing that, but none of that really annoys me. But what really annoys me is when people say it's so simple. Housing is so simple,
Mm.
and I wanted to build something that at least would kind of get at that. Would be something I could point to. When people say housing is so simple, I'd say, take a look at this thing and tell me what you think. Do you still think housing is so simple? Because I think that we have
Mm.
sort of this mass Dunning-Kruger syndrome when it comes to housing, where people they know so little, they don't know what they don't know, and they think it's very simple. When in fact, at least my view is that it's actually pretty complicated. And if you're going to have a view about what the nature of the crisis is and what the solutions are, the sort of price of admission is being aware of the debate. What really smart, credentialed, hardworking, established economists have published in peer-reviewed journals over the last 50 years, because they've been debating this for a long, long time at the highest levels. And we should be aware of that stuff. And if you're going to say, well, I think it's zoning, well, like I want to ask you what you think about all the papers that suggest that it's not actually zoning. Um, so I built this, in order to sort of get at this and solve this problem or give something to show people when they say housing is so simple, I built this thing called the Great Debate. So it brings together all the papers that, all the widely cited or the most widely cited papers published in peer-reviewed journals, including several of yours. You've published a bunch of stuff. I think one of your great contributions to the housing debate is that you have written some really good rebuttals, peer-reviewed rebuttals to some of the most widely cited papers,
Mm.
some papers that really that provide the intellectual foundation for the view that regulation is the reason that home prices are so high. So I wanted to bring together all of those different papers and summarize them in plain English. The fact is that housing is this funny thing where because it affects all of us, we all want to talk about it, but it's a super wonky thing. It's a very I think it's a very complex thing. There's a lot of finance,
Yeah.
there's a lot of economics. Not everyone has the toolkit to understand that. People have written papers about it, but the papers are really complex. They're full of math. They're full of all kinds of terms. Like how many people understand what exogenous means? Like it's really there's a desire to talk about it, but there's this sort of opacity to the cutting edge thought, and I wanted to bridge that. And I thought maybe I can do that because I'm not a PhD in economics and I have a master's degree in economics. I've like done a lot of economics and finance work. I'm a little bit dumb though. A lot of like the math in your papers, it's hard for me. Like I really have to work hard at it and get some help to parse it. And I thought, man, well, maybe that makes me a good translator of some of this stuff because I
Mm.
can sympathize with some of the difficulties people have in getting through these papers if they're going to read them. And to be honest, most people are not going to read academic, journal papers about the housing market.
It takes years. It's a skill. I don't think people realize it's a skill to read and understand academic papers, and that's essentially what you do as a PhD is learn to read and understand what on earth other people are saying and why, and how the analysis
Right.
works and why it teaches you to find the flaw in every single paper, including your own. Do you feel like can you share your screen? I think it's
Yeah.
worth just taking a look at what this site, the Great uh, debate looks like, because it's very accessible, and it's you know, I've tried for years to explain, here are the debatable aspects. Here is what we're arguing about. But you've seemed to be able to package it up very clearly.
Well, that's nice of you to say. Can you see my
Yeah,
screen?
yeah, I can. Is it
Yeah.
possible to make it bigger? Like
Yeah.
zoom in? No. Oh yeah, like that. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
great.
Okay.
Thanks.
Yeah. So what it is I've done this. I put this together knowing that like we're all busy and housing may not be the thing that everyone is spending their days thinking about. And so I try to keep it as straightforward as possible. I think that as a general approach to talking about stuff, the more complex the stuff that you're talking about is, the simpler your language should be. And so a good, great sign of someone who has really nothing to say is that they use really, like, all kinds of flourishes in their language and all kinds of jargon. And if you have something smart to
Hmm.
say, you should say it very simply as possible. And you should want your message to travel as far as possible by just making it as approachable as possible. So that's what I've done here. I grabbed all of the papers. To be transparent about it, AI helped. Claude Code helped me gather the papers, parse them, draw out like important quotes, helped me understand some of the models that were like mathematically very tough for me. Um, and as a kind of aside, one of the AI can be has like it's a jagged frontier of its capabilities. A lot of AI tools or misuse of AI can result in complete slop. One of the best uses of AI, I think, is going back and forth over academic papers because you load in this
Mm,
corpus of text and it's only talking to you about that text, and so it's not hallucinating.
mm,
And I've really been able to understand a lot of papers very quickly by harnessing AI tools. Also, just printing them out and reading them, but also going back and forth to understand some of the harder parts with AI. So I grabbed all these papers and I kind of put them into categories. Going from like it's the rules, which is the group of people who include like Glacier, who think that regulation is to blame for high home prices, all the way to the other end of the spectrum where I place some of your work, Cameron,
mm,
where you think it's not that, it's other stuff. Um, and so each author gets their own or each kind of yeah each author or group, or in some cases groups of authors who work together, gets their own sort of card where I've just in the most plain English possible explained what they have argued in their seminal papers, and where you see an outline like this that it's pulling up the actual quote to substantiate my interpretation of it. And then really importantly, like, so this is short, this is like 4 paragraphs and in plain English, and I don't think anyone who's listening to this or who reads your work or reads my work should be off put by this. This is accessible to should be to everybody. And then I've got the rebuttals. So this is about Ed Glaser and Joseph Yorko, who are kind of like the heavyweights of YIMBYism. And then you can read what they said, but then also down here the rebuttals, what you said. You published a peer-reviewed critique that argues the method, Glaser's method, shows no such thing. The gap between, well, this gets very technical and you need some context here, but I've got your rebuttal here. You can drop that down and see your entire rebuttal. I've also got other rebuttals that people have published. In some cases, there is a rebuttal to the rebuttal. I've also included that, and I've done this for every author. So these are all the folks who kind of agree with Glaser and all the rebuttals to what they've written. And then the next camp over is kind of talking about how they really like looked at the empirical evidence around what happens when you build, and some kind of agree with Glaser, some disagree. All the way over to people who argue that supply curves are convex, that in places like New York, part of the reason that we're not building as much here is because it's extremely expensive. Building up costs a lot, building in dense places costs a lot. Um, and then the group that includes you, which I call the realists, and would probably include myself there too, who say this is primarily about demand and inequality. And that's probably a little bit of a simplification of your view. But in any case, people can go over here and click on your name and see at least my understanding of your review, which I ran by you and it sounded like you weren't you felt that it was reasonably accurate, with quotes pulled from your work, and also the rebuttals that people have put up against your work. This one of the nice things about this is that nobody yelled at me for this. You were like, we're always getting yelled at no matter what your point of view is because someone who
mm,
disagrees and they want to tell you about it. But here I've tried to write it in a very objective way. Like I obviously have a view on this, but that doesn't really matter. That's not the point here. The point here is to just introduce the debate and all the angles that people have taken on this debate historically, what they've said in plain English, what other people have replied, And my hope is that people take the time. This would probably take 45 minutes to get through, but that would give you the full that would give you the full understanding of where the debate has been, where it is now, and I think would make people so much smarter when they come to the table and want to debate the nature of the housing crisis. That's
I
my
think
sales
it's
pitch.
great. Yeah, no, I was you emailed me to just check that you understood my position correctly, and I was pretty interested in what was going to come out of this exercise you were doing, and I got to say I was more than impressed with how you pulled it together and the clarity of each explanation. Because I obviously know all the arguments, but to say it so clearly in a paragraph is very very difficult, right?
Yeah.
When I in my workshops try and explain something, I've got a whiteboard, I've got a diagram, we're back and forth. What about this? Why? What about that? Um, and that, so it's a really difficult thing to communicate. So well done.
Yeah.
Can
Thanks
I
for that.
just say, um, have you got any feedback, or has it sparked any controversy, or is it too well uh, explained that it hasn't sparked controversy, so it's been ignored?
Yeah. It's been pretty good. I've been happy with the feedback. I got some emails from folks I know in the media world who said it was making the rounds in their newsrooms,
Oh, that's good.
and kind of prompted a bunch of meetings I have now lined up with like major media organizations and radio and print. It's also I've really got some nice feedback from the people quoted here and other people who are in the world of debating the housing crisis. Some of like I don't want to like say who's specific, but like some of the top authors here have who I've reached out to subsequently have said, I saw your thing about the great debate. I really liked it, and I thought that it was a really good summary of not only the debate but also my view. And so that's a very high compliment. I really like that.
Mm,
I really appreciate you saying that that I was able to explain stuff clearly because getting back to AI, I think many people, probably rightly so, are thinking about increasingly powerful AI models and wondering how their jobs are going to change and if what they do is going to be made redundant. And that's something I increasingly think about myself. Data analysis, data visualization. Cloud Code is very good at that now. One of the really one of the reassuring things is that when I was working on this project, as I said, going back and forth with Fable 5 over all these papers, really, really incredibly useful. Going through some of the math, really very useful. But when I overreach and ask Cloud Code to summarize a paper, it's bad. It's really bad. It
oh.
uses all kinds of jargon. It's not a human narrative. It's really hard to read. There, it's slop. It devolves into total slop. And I think that one of the at least today, one of the real roles for smart humans is to interpret and explain. I don't know how long that will be the case for. Maybe that will not. Maybe 2 years from now that will not be true anymore. But as it stands now, you cannot. I have not. I'm eyeballs deep in Cloud Code and AI tools. I use them a ton for my data visualizations. I could not have done some of the heavy lifting around the data visualization I do without those tools. I will say they are pretty garbage when it comes to explaining things in clear English, and that makes me happy because it means I have a job to do for a little bit longer.
Yeah, good. No, I'm on the side of still fairly skeptical about AI. My uses, it's useful for me when I already know the answer and it's helping clarify and bounce ideas off. If I don't know, it's not very useful because it tells me nonsense, right?
Mm.
So um, it is. I guess I see the value of. I've had this idea. Does it make any sense? And it can help you think. That's been very powerful. But I'm not really as much of a coder as you, and I suspect that's where it's very valuable
That's
to just
yeah,
churn out
yeah. I was about to
code.
ask you.
Whereas I'm trying to just explain. Like for me, the powerful things are almost just analogies. Like for example, I've been trying testing out this analogy of the housing market of as like it's demand is like the appetite of your hungry teenagers, and where you can build is like the food you have in the fridge, and the interaction of their appetite and the available food dictates which food they eat and also the rate at which they eat. And I'm trying to use these things because people uh, yeah, it's abstract thinking is very difficult without
Mhm.
physical analogies. And most of economics, and I guess your background in finance, is that abstract reasoning about the emergent outcome of a market. But yeah, for me, yeah, I've found AI not that helpful, except in bouncing ideas off. What do you think of this analogy? What about this? Would this make sense? But it doesn't seem
Yeah,
to do things for me.
I think having a healthy amount of skepticism about these tools is the right way to approach them. I've had disastrous results and become very cautious about using them. Um, but I have also, I think you're quite right to point out, like, it's great at coding. Like, unsurprisingly, tech hiring
Mm.
has slowed a lot. I think that's like, it's the beginning. I do believe in the SaaS apocalypse, having built a bunch of um, software tools recently, entirely vibe coded. I'm bringing my hopefully special design sense to this. But I really do feel that for coding is extremely powerful. If you can point these models at a specific set of information, whether that's like a data lake, I loaded all Census Bureau and Zillow and Redfin and all kinds of price data into this data lake, just a folder, and I query that. And in the background,
Mm.
Quad Code is writing code in Python to query that data and develop visualizations. Hallucination is not a problem at all there. The output is just a function of my creativity and my research skills. But I've got very good results from that.
So that's makes me want to ask you about this ProMap tool that you created. Did you vibe code that? It's a
Good.
mapping tool you've created, and
Yes.
it's very interesting because I know in the past you've had this idea of um, not mapping by geographical sort of polygons, the outlines of cities and counties and states, but with this bubble-sized bubble by location.
Hmm.
So one thing I find, so I've been, doing economics and property analysis for a long time. Maps are basically useless, especially in Australia, because you'll have, 100,000 people live on this tiny, tiny speck, and then 100,000 people live on the whole rest of the map. And you're trying to convey information that is about people as much as about how big the spaces are.
Hmm.
And you can't see any of it. Or there's that meme, right? Every map, what do you call it? A chloropleth? Every map
Hmm.
where the areas are shaded by some economic or social outcome, they're all the same. They're just a
Yeah.
map of the geography because where the people are is such a tiny area. So I remember you mentioned that you must have been an article years ago, and you decided you're going to do mapping housing data better. And what happened between then and now?
Yeah. Well, Claude Code happened for one. Can you let me just can you see my screen okay? Oh, I just lost you on audio. Hang on a second.
Yeah, sorry, a car just drove past me. I don't have this fancy office. I just have a front veranda in my house.
Oh.
And when the neighbors start mowing or a truck drives past, I just mute myself. Anyway, carry on.
I have a fancy office I call my bedroom, and maybe these AirPods are good at noise canceling because there's like fire trucks driving by constantly. But yes, you can see my screen. Was that the answer?
Yeah, yeah, that's
Okay.
the answer.
Okay. Can you, just so I know how much I need to speak to what's on the screen, can you see the text here? Can you see like select area, share, rank, or not really? Good.
Not very well, but I've got the same thing on my screen. Yeah, if you can make it a little bigger, that would probably be great.
Let's see if this works. If I zoom in. Yeah, is that a little bit better?
Oh yeah, that's much better.
Yeah.
Great.
Okay. Cool. All right. Yes. So we're very lucky in the US because we have there's a ton of data and it's free. So Zillow, Redfin gave out price data, inventory, price cuts, all kinds of stuff going back a decade for free. Also, the Census Bureau, which has just a ton of historical data. It's a little bit lagged, but we're really spoiled for great data here.
So can I
Uh,
just jump in? Why is
yeah.
Zillow? So Zillow is like an online. So I think the equivalent here is realestate.com or Cotality. It's like an online listings portal for selling your house. Why are they giving you 10 years of data at all this disaggregated level for free? Because our guys will charge you a fortune.
Yeah, I don't really know.
Oh,
To be honest, I don't really understand what they're doing there. I think that their idea is like, you give away data for free and then you kind of capture mind share and wallet share. But I don't know. And they seem very excited for me to use their data and give me access to the APIs for free. Um, Yeah,
Interesting.
I don't really know, but it's worked out great for me because what I can do is insert myself between that data and the user. The way they
Mm.
serve up this data is just as like spreadsheets, oftentimes, sometimes some basic like charts on their websites. But this data like is begging to be mapped. I will say, generally speaking, I do a lot of data visualization. I don't produce that many tools because mostly I've learned people just want the answer. They want you to use the tool to figure it out
Mm.
and then give them the answer. They don't want to use the tool. But when it comes to the housing market, a lot of the people who read my work are working in the industry, they're investors, they're builders, or they're real estate agents, and they don't care about what's happening in Florida. They work in New York City and they want to know about New York City, and they care about rents only and only in Manhattan. And other people just care about Florida, and other people just care about San Jose. So you need to. This is a an audience and an area where an interactive and yeah, an interactive tool is really what's needed. So yeah, this when you bring up the map, it's the way you get to it is through my website, homeeconomics.us, or just thepromap.com. I wanted to get promap.com, but that was like $10,000. So it's thepromap.com. And yeah, so this is like, I'll go through all this, there's some of this quickly, but this is showing you home prices. And the typical map you'll see looks like, I need to zoom in a little bit, but the typical map you'll see will look something like this, where you have a bunch of
Mm.
these polygons and they're filled with a color, and the color represents the variable you're trying to visualize. So, this place, Irene, South Dakota, has home prices have fallen by 2% over the past year there. And you can see that on the legend. Whereas, in this place, Mullen, Nebraska, they're up by 10%. So that's bright blue. Now, this is nice to look at and definitely has applications. But when you zoom out, your eye will be drawn oftentimes to, let me move this up, zip and maybe the county. Your eye will be drawn to like this thing. That's where my eye is drawn. That's like Cherry County, Nebraska, which has 5,500 people. Like not many. There are that many people like in my apartment building in New York City. So this is the reason that chloropleth maps are not great. They pull your eye towards things that are geographically large rather than, say, populous, which is probably what you care about. So this was like the kind of the beginning, along with the idea that like, hey, I can do something with this free data. This was the other idea that like I can kind of do better maps than other people have been doing. And one of the ways that I think this is better is that it has bubble mode. And so we'll get away from those misleading boundaries and stick this on bubbles. This is just the same thing, but each county or each zip code has a little bubble associated with it, and the size of that bubble is proportional to the population there. So your eye will be drawn
Mm.
to a place like um, Belgrade, Montana, which has like 22,000 people, and less to something like Clyde Park, which only has 729 people. It's like a natural way of drawing your eye to the places that you care about because they have more people. Um,
Yeah.
and I've just been building this up over weeks. I spent a lot of time thinking about the design, the UI, the UX, the colors, and the user experience, and keeping it as simple as possible. But this has kind of become my go-to tool for analyzing the housing market visually. Sometimes I'm going to go to the code and I'm going to do other stuff, but this has been just a really satisfying way of looking at the market. So let me do a really quick demo about yes.
Yeah. I was going to say, like, you've been into mapping all this data, and as you go, I imagine you notice some patterns that you didn't expect or that you had suspicions about, and then they just pop out right there.
Yeah, yeah. So like very much so. It's been a great tool for like sort of substantiating empirically something. I think this thing is happening. Is it actually happening? Well, then I'll go in here and check it out. So one of the things I've been talking about and thinking about is the relationship between urban cores and suburbs. Um,
Mm.
and I've been trying to look at the different facets of what's happening recently, which is that the value of homes in cities has stagnated compared to the suburbs. And this tool provides a really nice way of visualizing this. So because this is kind of, let's spend a minute just thinking about this relationship between the urban core and suburbs in New York City. So this, I've zoomed in here on New York City. I'm going to switch it into boundaries mode. So now it's going to look at the actual geographic boundary of each zip code. And um, I've loaded it up to home prices by zip code. I'm looking at the changes over the past year. I'm going to switch this to 5 years because I want to look at this over a longer period of time. It's showing percentage change. And what it's telling me is that all this stuff that's colored gray and black has underperformed. It's only risen, 8, 16, 20%, whereas all the stuff that's very blue has risen 30, 40%. And you can see very clearly New York City, the five boroughs and New Jersey have underperformed the broader area. So that's useful right there. Like I don't know any other tool that can do that for you that quickly.
So
But
the data here on the price change is the Zillow. Is it a hedonic price or is it a median advertised price? Is it all properties or just apartments or just houses?
this
How do I
is
know when
all,
I look at this which data I'm using?
yeah, you know from this little text here that's the
Ah,
Zillow
yes.
ZHVI or ZHVI as we say in the US, which you would have to know is the Zillow indices are hedonic indices. Um, it shows you it's a monthly index. It doesn't. This is a good point, Cameron. I should incorporate that. It's all houses here. It's both. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's like a
So
co
so it's
standards.
apartments and detached houses and it's quality adjusted. So when the luxury apartment building's selling out, it doesn't make the index spike that
Exactly.
month. Yeah,
So we
got it.
might quickly say, hey, is this actually a thing that's happening in other places? When you type in the search box, you can do that. So I'm going to look at Chicago, for example. Is it true there? So when we type it in, it'll kind of outline in yellow the area you've chosen, which is Chicago. Yes, Chicago, same thing. The center of the city is black. It's home prices have gone up 2% there in McKinley Park, whereas they're up 40% in further areas further out. So let's go back to New York, and let's look at this again. So, one of the reasons we might suspect that this is happening is that people are leaving the city. So I'm going to look at population um, and see how population has changed. So I'm going to put this on total population. This is still in zip code, which is so it's kind of hard to see the broader trends. I'm going to go up to county level. And again, we're looking over the past 5 years, changes in population, and you can see pretty clearly the center of the city is, gray, black. It's losing people, whereas the outerlying areas are gaining people. So that tells you something. We can look even more deeply at what's driving that population change. You can look at net
I'm gonna
migration.
I'm gonna get all nerdy. How do you know the population data between census periods? Do you know how that's estimated?
Yeah, well, we've got the census releases. As it says here, the PEP is the Population Estimates Program, which
Hmm.
is annual. So it's pretty incredible. They give you annual data, um, yeah, down to the county level.
Hmm. So yeah, we don't have that much detail between census years, but they do have some estimates based on like number of new addresses and post um, postal addresses and things like that. But
Hmm.
um, yeah, just a heads up that it's an estimate, not a census. The
Hmm.
in between years, and that's important in Australia when you use that data. Um, yeah,
You probably
sorry,
have it.
I'm just really nerdy about where the data comes from because sometimes we assume the word that the data is called is means the common language meaning of the word and not the technical specific meaning of the word that the statisticians use.
Yeah.
Um, so I'm always on the lookout. But yeah, and this is one issue I'd come across. So you've got pretty decent annual estimates at these zip code levels,
Yeah, and they
county
even give
levels is
county
particularly.
levels. Yeah, yeah, and they even give you things like you can look at domestic migration. So actually, let's look at international migration. So when you look at international migration, this whole thing is blue, and this is a good chance for me
Mm,
to point out another nice little feature. The theme here is that I designed this for me, and so if I get frustrated in using other tools or like have questions I haven't been able to answer, I just integrate that into the map here. And so one of the things I always wanted to do was say, like, sometimes I want to look at New York compared to the whole country, but sometimes I just want to compare this area to like one specific part of this area to another specific part of this area. How do you do that? And so I've embedded that in this global versus local toggle. So right now, this is showing you that all these places got substantial amounts of international migration, the whole New York area compared to the rest of the country. But I don't really care about that. I want to look at
ah,
within this area, which counties are getting more and less. And so I stick it on local mode. And now it's going to just compare what I can see here in the viewfinder. And it's showing me that, the New York City area, the center of the city has gotten a, a lot of international migration compared to further outlying areas. But if you look at like New York County, for example, this is as of midway through last year. They got 13,270 international migrants, but if you look at domestic migration, they lost this county that I'm in right
mm,
now lost 16,000 people, 17,000 people. So been a net out migration of people, and they're going to other parts of the country, other parts of the Northeast. So that's another hint because we're seeing like the core underperforming the suburbs. Part of this is about population change. The drive of the population change seems to be even though we're getting some international migration into the city, there's a greater amount of domestic out migration. And then we can think about like what is it that over the last 5 years is driving people to migrate out of the city? And you can look at stuff like commute to downtown. And this is pretty interesting. If you look at commute to downtown, I'm going to zoom in on New York. So here blue means short commute, black means long commute. And you can see that this inner area, short commutes and then longer commutes out there. If you switch this back to home prices, you can see they're very similar maps. This is again home prices over the past 5 years, and that all the places that are a
Mm.
quick commute into the city are places that have done pretty poorly. And there's like a natural narrative that falls out, which is that we had COVID, people can work from home, they don't need to commute to the city as much, and so all those places that have been boosted by quick commute times to the city have underperformed.
Mhm.
Um, you can also look at
So
things. Yeah.
that pattern you also, so I think that's been true in Australia as well, and that pattern of international migration concentrated in the major cities and domestic migration away from those areas to the suburbs is also been true for 25 years in Australia.
Mhm.
So it's interesting to see it so clearly. I wonder how broad that pattern is globally,
Yeah, the
because yeah, it's
data.
definitely the same.
Yeah, there's some pretty cool data in the US where the census asks people if you moved in the past year, why did you move? And they give people a whole menu of options that people can choose from. And what I've found striking in that data is that contrary to the popular narrative, when people move from Manhattan to Scarsdale, say any suburb around New York City, they don't report having moved for affordability reasons. They report having moved for more space, sometimes better
Mm,
schools, sometimes crime, but the overarching, the most common reason is people just want more space. And so the way I think about it is that um, what happened during COVID was that suddenly people were kind of liberated in a way to make their own choices according to what they want to do. And they want more space. Suddenly you don't have to be in the city. Um, you can work from home,
mhm,
you can work from elsewhere. And so they also had income. We had a lot of fiscal transfers during COVID. Interest rates were really low. It was most household balance sheets were pretty healthy, and so people said, "Well, we're going to do what we've, unshackled of these constraints, needing to be in the city, having financial constraints were those were lessened. They did what they want to do, which is move to the suburbs." A lot of people who live in New York City think they kind of demonize the suburbs and don't understand how anyone could want to live there. But like the map here might give you some sense of why people want to live in the suburbs. Here's population density. You can see blue here is more
mm.
dense, and so people. Not everyone wants population density. They don't want like 32,000 people per square mile. They want to live in more sparsely populated places. Also, you can own a home more easily. If you look at the home ownership rate, owner-occupied homes, similar story. The number of owner-occupied homes in my zip code is 30%, 31%, but up here it's 93%. So
Wow.
people wanted to go to places where they can have a better shot at owning a home. Alpine, New Jersey is actually one of the fanciest neighborhoods in this area. So it's probably not a great example, but
Mhm.
maybe they would move to, say, North Belmore, where the homeownership rate is still 90%. Um, Other fun things I've integrated here, for example, one of the reasons I know Alpine, New Jersey is pretty fancy is because when I look at home prices, I won't do that, but I know it's very high. And I was wondering, like, I often want to know, like, what does stuff look like there? Like, what does Alpine, New Jersey actually look like? And so I integrated this street view so you can see, okay, if you zoom out and like let's pick a street over here. This is Alpine,
Oh
New
wow.
Jersey. So like
Wow.
yeah, I can see why I haven't shown you home prices here, but I can tell you they're very high. Let me close this and switch to home prices, and you can see
It's okay, mate. I know enough about the housing market to know that that picture shows expensive houses.
3.2 million. So, the other nice thing is like, is that normal? Like maybe you live in Brisbane and you don't know what 3.2 million US actually
Mm.
means. That a lot or little? You can click chart here, and that brings, there's no history for that. That's very odd. Okay, never mind that. I was going to show you a feature where you can chart
Try another
prices.
place nearby. Surely.
Yeah. Yeah. Here's the
There we
zip
go.
code just up in the 10024. And so this shows you the evolution of prices. New York has actually done very poorly compared to the rest of the country for a long time. You can see that if I add in a line for the United States, obviously New York is way higher than the US, so that's not super useful, but you can look at the year over year growth rate of housing.
Mm.
The Upper West Side, my neighborhood is in blue here, underperformed the US for a long time and is now finally
Yeah.
outperforming. So you can do that for
Is
every.
that because of upzoning, mate? I'm sorry. I just, um, yeah, no, people forget. They're like, oh, it's so expensive still, but it's underperformed for 10 years. I just saw some data this morning. London, England, underperforming. Real prices are back pre-financial crisis once you've accounted for inflation. And I just think, wow, okay, so is that a success? Yeah,
Mhm.
anyway, mate, I'm
You,
surprised. I'm gonna have to click around more on this map because that street view is super cool. And little charts, so you just click on the map and then get the history of the data that you're looking at is it's pretty sophisticated, I got to say.
I've kind of lost, Cameron, I've lost my mind on this thing. I've gone so deep. Now it's really a tool that's like built for me. There's so many little things in it. Hopefully it's still usable for most people. This is something I just put in today. This kind of your clicker. You can see how this looked at various points in time. You can go back in time. You can go back all like for 20 years and see how things looked over time. It's so cool. Another neat thing. Remember I said Alpine, New Jersey is fancy? One reason I
Yeah.
knew that is because when I look at home price levels, um, and I go to rank, um, so this little tool, it ranks. I often was on this map and I want to see, well, what are the standout things? So this little rank feature, it'll take your variable that you're looking at, home prices in this case, levels,
Mm.
and it'll give me the highest 3 or 5 or 10 places. And Alpine, New Jersey is number two. That's how I was like
Mm.
fooling around this, and I was like, Alpine, New Jersey, what's that all about? And then I went to the street view and I realized, okay, this is actually a pretty fancy part of the New York metro area.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah.
So this is keeping you busy. So you can sign up for this, right? Like I now subscribe to this mapping tool. Is that how you've made it?
Yep, you go to the promap.com and you can sign up. There's some stuff that's free. If you try to click on something that's not free, you'll get prompted to sign up, and it's $9 a month, which is basically free. It's that's really really cheap compared to I've looked at the other tools that do similar stuff and maybe don't have as nice functionality, and they're much more expensive. So I'm not getting rich on this. I am just putting it out there, trying to cover my API and other data costs. There is some data I have to pay for, and hoping that it comes back to me in good karma, maybe some consulting work. Um, uh, but I use it a ton for my analysis. So even if I'm the only one who subscribes to it, it's already been useful.
We have guys trying similar things in Australia with mapping tools and whatnot. And I would say you probably want to be about um, $89 a month or 99, not nine, given what Australia's charging for less information in a less accessible way for different attempts at housing data mapping tools. It's going to be tax deductible for all these investors anyway. Um, yeah, maybe we should work on an Australian version because you might not believe it, but I reckon we're more housing obsessed in Australia.
I get that sense. I get that sense. I have a lot of well, I have a disproportionately high number of followers from Australia compared to the population of Australia versus the US. How many people live in
Yep,
Australia? 20
28,
million?
28
28.
million.
Yeah, it's like one tenth the size of the US, but I
I
have
think it's
more
about
than
12 to 15 times bigger the US. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
No, we're obsessed with housing. Doesn't matter where. We'll come over and invest. It's funny
Well,
when
the
when the
reason
yeah.
the reason is the Anglosphere, Cameron. The Anglosphere is has implemented really stringent zoning regulations. I don't know if you read this, but it's a problem with the Anglosphere, and so all the Anglosphere countries, although somehow the U.S. is, but, Canada, where I'm from, also hugely housing obsessed.
Here's a question for you. So you've started in finance. You've got all these skills, mapping, visualization, financial and economic analysis. What jumped out to you um, when you encountered the housing debate that was just obviously seemed wrong? Like, what? Why didn't you get into housing and go, oh, it must be all regulations? That's what everyone's saying. Because the temptation is to just say what everyone else is saying. Um, was there something that jumped out to you looking at the data that you said, oh, that story just doesn't fit the data? I looked at it and that one doesn't either. Maybe the whole story is something quite different.
Yeah.
Where did
Um,
it start for you on that sort of road?
well, I've been talking for a while here about the map, so I want to hear your answer to that question, but I'm going to tee you up with what initially struck me, which was that um, the the conventional answer about why housing is so expensive is that we've implemented really stringent zoning regulations in our cities. We don't allow density to be built. We make it illegal to build. And so we can't get a sufficient supply of housing to meet the demand, and so prices go up and quantities are insufficient. And that is the view that's espoused by most people who look like me, who like live in Manhattan, wear glasses and are slightly nerdy, and like I've done a lot of school or some school, and like whatever, are progressive. And so that was my tribe. That's how that was kind of my like that was my initial orientation. But the first thing I noticed was that Well, this is a global phenomenon. I've lived in other parts of the world. I'm not from the US, and so it struck me immediately that we had this problem in Canada too. And I lived in the UK, we have that problem there too. I lived in Sweden, they have that problem there too. So, do all these places have NIMBYism and zone? Well, I don't know. I don't think so. Germany has this problem too. They have a completely different approach to zoning there. Also, this seems to have been a problem for like decades and decades, if not centuries. And in eras where zoning didn't exist either. So that told me pretty quickly that zoning may be a necessary, but it's certainly not a sufficient explanation for what's going on here. And then as I started to think about, well, what are the other explanations? Because clearly there are other explanations. Zoning is not the only one. I realized actually maybe those other explanations are much more coherent and much more powerful in explaining what's happening with home prices.
Yeah, I think you're right. Zooming out historically and internationally forces you to have a new perspective. My favorite quote, I don't know which Twitter follower got me onto Charles Darwin's
I love
Beagle
this one.
Diaries
It's so
from
good.
1830, 32 or 36, I'll have to confirm, where the first day he arrives in Sydney, population 19,000, he observes the number of large homes recently built is truly surprising. Nevertheless, everyone complains of the high rents and difficulty in procuring a house. Like, like we were complaining so much in the 1830s that the famous Charles Darwin wrote it on his diary entry on his first day because it was such a notable thing about the country. um, it's astonishing. So I'm pretty sure there was no zoning there, although I have been told because a funny story. There's this method that you talked about earlier that Ed Glacer uses to show the zoning tax, and it was in your great debate. So I replicated that method using data from the Queensland archives. I had to go and I had to scan the microfilm that you put in the machine from the land purchase records of the 1850s when the state was auctioning off land. So in Australia, the land was all taken by the British and owned by the state, and the state funded a lot of development by auctioning off land to the private sector and then building public infrastructure. And I used those records and I replicated Ed Glacer's method. And I said, look at the zoning tax in the 1850s in Queensland. And of course, the headlines in the newspapers from the time were also like foreigners buying up all of the land, nothing for locals in the land auctions. And I had the response that, oh, maybe there were some barriers to supply then as well. I'm like, I mean, what evidence will change your view on this if
Yeah.
that doesn't?
So,
Oh, and
so
I got from this archaeological textbook the price records transcribed from clay tablets of land
yeah,
transactions in ancient
Mesopotamia, right?
Mesopotamia and did the
Yeah.
same thing. And someone said, oh, yeah, they probably had town planning and zoning. Come on.
Yeah, I mean it's Occam's razor, right? Like let's there, like you can come up with all kinds of really convoluted theories about why housing is expensive, but just probably start with the simplest ones, which is it's just normal economics and finance. Can you tell me what are the things about the conventional view do you find surprising and really quite wrong? What are the things that you read over and over again and you're like,
Yeah,
that's just not correct?
mate, almost everything that's written about housing in the newspaper. Um, so, good question. So probably, um, yeah, ignoring the asset pricing element of houses, that the yield is a price. So the yield is like how much income you get per year divided by what you pay for the asset, right? And that ratio is a price. That ratio emerges from the asset market because you can swap houses for other assets and get different yields with different exposure to different risks. And and the idea that we increase supply and we change the capital value price, that has to affect the yield, right? And we just ignore it as if that price doesn't exist in the market. So that's probably the biggest thing. I think as soon as you switch your mentality to house is an asset with a yield and we can swap houses for other assets and get away from that, oh, they're not the same as other assets. People need a place to live. I'm like, okay, so we need something to eat as well, but that farm is still an asset and that supermarket is still an asset, right? And the house is still an asset, whether you own the farm and eat the food you grow, or own the house and occupy the house you own, or you rent it from someone else. It's all the same economics. So I think that's the first thing. We've got to get away from that. Housing is different. It's people need stuff. I'm like, yeah, there are social spatial and geographic elements to housing, and it is disruptive when prices change and incomes don't, because people have to relocate to find something that they can afford, and that is socially disruptive. But these
So
are normal market outcomes. They're not
yeah, so
special
right.
particular housing outcomes, and they're not special particular ones because of some zoning that you know is just the first thing you can point your finger at to blame.
So even if people accept you to play devil's advocate, so even if I
Mm-hmm.
accept that view, which obviously I feel the same way, but even if I accept that view that this is an asset and there's a series of cash flows and you discount them by some risky interest rate and you get a price, uh, uh, does that preclude increasing the supply? Like, if you increase the supply of investable assets, should the yield not fall? Similarly, can't you um, bring down yields and prices on housing by building more of it?
Hang on, you're going to bring down yields, but doesn't that mean the price goes up? So, I mean,
Mm.
if the yield's lower, the price relative to the cash flow, so the yields have come down when prices went up, right?
So would it push
Um,
it the wrong way? If you built more,
I don't know what way it's meant to push. No one's really told me what their theory of this is. They just keep saying it's supply and demand. And there was a recent article published by one of the YIMBY groups in Australia re-explaining this supply and demand chart as if with sort of no intellectual supporting structure there. It's like, why? Supply and demand is a tautology. And I actually worry a little bit about how we teach economics. The market price comes from trades, right? And all the trades that have happened are those where the buyer was willing to pay the seller more than what they would accept, right? That's all supply and demand does. It just describes that by putting the suppliers in a queue, in an order from the person willing to accept the least to the most, and the buyers in order, and says everything on that side of the chart has been traded because the buyers were willing to pay more than what the sellers were willing to accept. That's just a description. It's not a theory of where a price comes from. It's a description of where prices come from, because the supply is a willingness of a person to trade something, and that comes from somewhere. It comes from their, for example, ability to not sell in this period and sell in the next period. Same with the demanders. These things come from somewhere. And yes, trading sets the price and the quantities. That's a tautology, but I think we need a theory of where these things come from. So that's sort of one point. A second point on housing as an asset, it probably brings you to the next sort of um, forgotten part of housing, is that why are homes built? I don't think I don't think there is a theory or an understanding of that in the public discourse on housing, because people will say, "Oh, houses get built when the price is above the cost of production." And I'm like, how can the price be above the cost? Do you not believe in markets closing all arbitrage opportunities? That's like saying there are investments I can make in the share market, the stock market, that will give me um, free, abnormally high risk adjusted returns that aren't priced in. Because that land is an asset, that house is an asset, and you can't just have vacant land sitting there at a price that gives you free risk adjusted returns when you build houses. And so the market has to close that gap so that the sum of all the input costs is essentially the output cost once you account for all the risk involved. And people go, oh, okay, so if the cost is the price, why do we build anything? Why do we ever build houses? And that's I call it sort of an intellectual black hole. But the answer is simply this: we build houses. Building a house is a sort of temporal choice, right? Every piece of land you can build a house on, you can either build it now, or you can build it tomorrow, or you can build it in 10 years. And everyone's trying to build as fast as they can. All the property owners are competing. But the emergent outcome of this is that if it pays you more to wait, then you wait. You're not competing to build houses, you're competing to make money. And your alternatives are build houses or wait. And the payoff to both of those things in terms of risk adjusted returns should be equal. And if it wasn't equal, you would switch from one to the other. And what happens is there's lots of what people call feasible new houses, but the rate at which we build them is constrained by this wait versus build trade-off, right? For example, there are subdivisions in Gladstone, which is a small Queensland town of a few thousand people, that have 4,000 housing lots approved. right? And they've sold maybe 20. And you could build 3,980 more houses where the market price is above the construction cost, but you're not going to, because the better alternative is to wait, right? Each incremental one, it's better to sell it next year than build this year. And the present value of that sum of flows is higher if we go super, super, super slow than try and crash the market.
Yeah, I think
So,
I think that concept, like,
yeah.
getting back to is housing simple and your argument that actually it's fairly straightforward. I think this is stuff that is not straightforward for most people. I think you think
Okay.
it is because you live in that world and you have a PhD in economics. But you're talking about the optionality of the land, right? And it's not a totally straightforward thing.
Yeah, it's not straightforward. I'll give you an analogy that I think helps. This is why I said before analogies are helpful. Have you ever noticed in a traffic jam on a highway with two lanes that you try and swap lanes to get ahead, and then you try and swap again, but that at the end of the traffic jam, the guy who was next to you is still next to you? That both traffic lanes actually have the same average speed. Have you noticed that?
Hmm.
Well, the way I use this analogy to explain that this is an equilibrium outcome, because if one lane went faster, people would trade lanes and speed up the lane they came from and slow down the lane they're going to. And because of that trading opportunity, you can't just have one lane go real fast and lane go slow in a traffic jam. And then I tell people, okay, the lanes are the returns to not building, waiting on my vacant land while its price goes up, and there's good reasons for that. And the other one is the return to building a house, the total economic return. So if the return to building speeds up, what do? Well, I change lanes. When I do that, I slow down the return to building and I speed up the return to waiting, right? And the number of cars that switch to maintain those average speeds is how many houses we build. And the constraint is the return to waiting.
I think one of the
How does
one
that
of
work?
the
How does that work for
that,
you? Sorry.
that's good. That's a good analogy. I like that one. But and that's in the book. I remember you have the shop, like two lines in a shopping market analogy.
Mm,
Um, one of the pushbacks I've seen you get is that how, and this is foundational in Glacier, right? That housing is not a monopoly, that it's a competitive market, and that you as a landowner might have this optionality in your land and choose to produce now or produce later. But you don't own all the land, and there are other owners who can make their own decisions. And so, unless you can lock up all the land and collude, then somebody should produce. Someone should produce now. Do
yeah.
they all, do they all hold back
So
production?
no, everyone's trying to build as quickly as possible. But if you build too fast, you lose money and you go broke. And those who build slower win, right? Like the market selects for the right amount. I think yeah, there is a foundational I think misunderstanding in economics about this monopoly versus competitive market. And there were big historical debates about what is a monopolistic competition and what is perfect. Like there is no such thing as price taking, right, in the market. That is just a simplification of short-term adjust that we use in a market to describe short-term adjustments. Um, so let's be clear on that. Where I've moved to is that, yeah, of course, one individual plot of land is not a monopoly, but the system of property titles or deeds is a monopoly. I cannot offer you a deed to this physical space and compete with the other guy offering you a deed to that physical space, right? That is a monopoly. And once we have the monopoly, then we get the outcome. It's competitive within it, but we get the monopoly outcome where the price of the land gets bid up to fill any arbitrage, right? Like,
You're saying
um,
each owner of land is a monopolist on that plot of land.
well, think of it like I'm a shareholder of the Apple company, right? I'm not a monopolist. Why don't I just sell it and get my cash really quickly, right? There's millions of Apple shareholders. What are they waiting for? Why don't they sell and get cash instead? Well, yeah, they own part of this bigger thing, which has a sort of whatever, whether it's monopolistic or not, some kind of future economic gain. And they're not just going to panic sell to make the price go down because they want to hold the thing to get the future return. And people have this weird thing in mind that property owners are impatient. And I think that's another sort of psychological error. Property owners are patient. In fact, if I outbid you to buy a plot of land, I'm probably the most patient out of all the potential buyers that could have bought this because I was willing to pay the most and wait for the best opportunity in the future.
Mm.
Um, People own land because they want to hold that risk and get the future return, not because they're in a hurry to build houses just because they can. People own Apple shares because they want to hold those shares and get the future returns, not because they're in a hurry to get cash. Otherwise, they would have kept the cash. So I think that's just the mental shift of land as an asset, housing as an asset. Let's compare it to other assets. So this monopolistic thing, I think my view has changed. I don't like to say anymore that land is a monopoly. I like to say we create property rights systems when we want to use prices to allocate things. And we do that with intellectual property, and we do that in all sorts of ways. We don't have to have prices for land and a tradable property rights system. We could have the king just tell people where to live and what to build, right? But we don't. And every time we create this system of tradable property rights, we get these emergent outcomes.
Mm.
So anyway, if you come to my workshop, the first day is on creating property rights, and we go through some historical examples, and we look at creating rights to minerals on the seabed in Antarctica, and we sort of cover that point of we're creating a system of property rights. We know there's going to be an emergent market pricing outcome, just like there is in land.
Mm. What is your sort of elevator pitch for um, let's say solving the housing crisis?
Yeah. Well, I don't think there's a housing crisis. I think we're in a housing cycle that's been very disruptive, and many people are upset for many different and opposite reasons about what's happened to housing in the last 5 years since COVID.
Mm.
Um, so property developers are upset because construction costs have gone up, and they thought they were going to get higher prices and not have to deal with higher costs. So they don't like that. Um, First home buyers, well, the first home buyers from 2022 are happy. And hang on, I'm gonna get my mail.
The conventional view about why um, uh, home prices are what they are is that um, supply and demand is the operating framework, and supply is being restricted by regulation. Um, you don't feel that that's actually the cause of high home prices, or the determination of home prices, whether you think they're high or not. Um, in if you get into the elevator and you start having this conversation with someone, they say, yeah, it's these NIMBYs, and you have 45 seconds, and this is not an economist that you're in the elevator with. It's like a young person trying to buy a home and is frustrated that it's expensive to live in Brisbane or Melbourne or Sydney or New York City. How do you explain this to them?
Yeah. My God. Firstly, I'll take a minute to think before my 45 seconds of explaining, because this is, I guess, part of the issue is that everyone is agrees that NIMBYs are to blame, but they all have different problems with housing. For some, it's the rental market. For some, the price went up. For some, they think its interest rates are too high because they got a mortgage at 2% and now it's 6%. Right? Everyone has an exposure to the housing market from a different perspective, and hence a different problem. So I think that's important. And I don't think
Oh,
that's well recognized at all. We all are talking housing crisis and thinking we mean the same thing. If you mean just why did the price of houses go up in the last few years in lots of places around the world, I would say I'm not quite sure it's NIMBYs, because home prices pretty much around the world in the last 5 years have boomed since COVID because we put interest rates down to make them go up and gave people lots of money. And now we're trying to do the opposite by stopping people buying houses and putting interest rates up, hoping the price comes down. That's, I think that's the story. And, it's funny. I'll give you a bit of a political insight. I have spoken to politicians, and because in my book, I say, look, if you think there's a problem with the price of housing and who gets to live where, why don't you just build houses and rent them at the price you think is fair to the people who deserve them? And this politician said to me, why would we do that? Where's the market failure? The market's doing exactly what we want. We lowered interest rates, prices went up, and now we put them up, and people aren't buying as many houses, and prices will probably come down. What's wrong that you're solving? And I'm like, okay, so you actually don't agree there's a housing crisis or the market's doing something abnormal, but you've just spent the last 6 months on the campaign trail arguing the opposite to make people feel better. And I get to the point where I think a lot of the debate is fake. We just like to complain about something as a team, and housing is the current thing. And I'll predict the next current thing in Australia is going to be data centers. I'm hearing people having complaints about them. I'm like, oh wow, we've moved to the next thing to complain about. Oh,
It's
interesting.
already, yeah, it's already front and center in the US. Yeah, I think one of the things
And
that you've talked about in the past is that you can see this kind of psychotic reaction or schizophrenic reaction to housing in the sense that home prices are going up and there's something bad about it. Like, people can't afford homes, and home prices are going down. That's also reported in a really alarming way. It's very clear that there are different people on opposite sides of that equation. Um,
yeah,
yeah, one of the things I struggle with is that I think the nature of the housing crisis is mischaracterized often. That uh, if you go back decades and centuries, um, people have generally spent 25 to 35%. If you look at like the middle of the range, the median household, they've spent 25 to 35% of their income on housing over time. And that's been a like remarkably stable number across countries and over time. And I think that it reflects the nature of housing and people's like preferences. If they get more income, they want to spend more of that income on housing. And if they like, so you might have, if you look at like the median household in America over the past 40 years, their incomes have gone up. Like that median household has a real income that's substantially higher than 40 years ago, but they're still spending the same amount on housing. That's true generally. Yes, richer people spend less of their income on housing, than do poor people. But within those quintiles, over time, as they're getting richer, they're still spending the same on housing. It's homothetic within, as I kind of say, within income buckets. And so when people say, one of the common metrics for saying there's a housing crisis is that people are spending too much of their income on housing. Well, I mean, maybe they are, but that's been the case forever. Then maybe we've
mm,
always had I mean, if there's a housing crisis today, there's always been a housing crisis. Um, it
yeah,
I will add one wrinkle, which is that if you look at the housing is a human right. People need shelter, but it is not uh, we might say if you're looking for the housing crisis, you're not going to find it in the proportion of income that people spend on housing. You might find it in conditions. So maybe that median household is spending 32% of their income on housing, and they always have. But these days, what that 32% of their income gets them is like squalor. It's like a rat-infested,
mm,
cockroach-filled place in the suburbs. It's like a 2-hour commute to work. I think that's where we have to look for the housing crisis. It's there, and we don't see it because actually homes are getting bigger. People are living in more square footage. So
yeah,
I don't think we see it there. What I do think we see is that the people at the very bottom end of the income spectrum, call it the bottom 15 or 20%, do struggle to get adequate housing. And I think that is the housing crisis. It's not new, but it doesn't mean it's not a crisis. And it's one that needs a pretty different toolkit to address it because it's not about the prevailing market rate of housing that might be impacted by changing zoning and supply, even in the most optimistic circumstances. It's income support, it's subsidies,
mm,
it's literally giving people housing because they just don't have the income to afford
yeah.
any degree of market determined housing.
Yeah, you should see housing as part of the bundle of income and life support for people like medical care and etc. I'm definitely with you. I would say the salience of the topic since COVID. Um, well, firstly, 2017 to 2019 was one of the best times in Australia to buy a house. Right, interest rates had come down, rents were flat and falling. I told all my friends to buy houses in 2019. I was trying to buy one just before COVID hit. So if zoning's the problem, it created the best time in 30 years to buy a house, 2 years before it created the worst time, or 4 years before it created the worst time. So that's a puzzle that needs solving. But the post-COVID change, I think, is a lot to do with just overall inflation in the economy that people haven't experienced before. Not since the 70s have we had a sharp inflation pulse like that. And the thing about that curve, you called it Sunderji's law, right? That
Sunderji's paradox,
the
yeah.
as incomes rise, we keep spending the same share, even though your relative income rises, you spend less on housing. I think the trick is we've had this inflation and we've had inflation in household incomes as well, but it hasn't occurred evenly, right? And so if the average inflation was 30% over 5 years and my income went up 15%, my rent's still going to go up 30%. So I'm behind on the inflation distribution, right? My income hasn't kept up with inflation. I'm on the back of the distribution there. But where I live might be on the other side of the distribution of inflation in housing rents. Whereas there are other people in the same economy who can rent the same places as you, whose incomes rose faster than inflation, and they're outbidding your rents at your place. And you feel like the fact that the rent's going up is someone else's problem, and the fact that your income's going up is your output. Whereas they're both just part of this overall inflation pattern we've had to experience. And so some people are getting left behind. And I have a nice chart in my workshop where I have an example of people shifting in the distribution as we get inflation in incomes and rents. And I suspect that's a lot of what happened historically. In the 70s, there was a housing crisis. I can cut newspaper headlines from the 70s and put them in to today, and people would think they wouldn't even notice if I cut word for word, right?
Hmm.
These 1970s newspaper articles, because in Australia there was something like 40% inflation in the first few years of the 70s, and house prices in Brisbane, where I live, went up 100%, and pretty much the same as what happened in the last 5 years, and same political debates about housing, same everything.
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of the closest parallel
Yeah.
to what we're seeing.
We see these things happen, time and time again. And I think part of it is that house prices don't fall. They're very sticky. If you own a home, you're typically reluctant to sell it for less than you bought it for. And so, what the adjustment tends to happen via transactions. There are fewer transactions.
Mm.
The price that would keep up the same level of transactions would be lower, but people don't want to sell for a lower price. And so the market just kind of is in stasis. And there's like a buyer strike, and nothing much happens for a bunch of years. And then gradually incomes grow, as they tend to do, and home prices don't move. And so home prices are kind of restored to a level that comes along with a normal degree of transactions. We're seeing that now. We saw that in the early 90s. It took about 5 years to get back to normal. Yeah, so I think that's just the cyclical nature of housing.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. The cyclical nature is always every cycle we think it's a structural issue. So that's the economist jargon. Structural means something that is persistent. Cyclical is like part of the boom and bust. Every
Yeah,
cycle we think, oh, it's this 30-year planning problem. We thought that in the 70s. We thought it every cycle previously as well.
there's this mismatch between the cyclical and the secular. This misunderstanding of what is cyclical and what's secular, and I think it's related to the way that we talk about housing. Home prices today are much higher than they were 5 years ago. The supply picture is not vastly different. The explanation lies on the demand side. I don't think that's controversial. I think even like most, supply Airbnbs would agree with that. Interest rates have gone down and then up, and people had a great desire to move during the pandemic. Incomes didn't change sufficiently quickly, and now home prices are sitting at a level that, at current interest rates, are unaffordable for most people. This is a function entirely of issues on the demand side, not on the supply side. But the conversation that people want to have is about an insufficient amount of supply and about regulation. And I think realistic people will argue that you're not going to see supply dictating home prices on a 5-year basis, but over a 20-year time period, you will see cumulatively lower home prices in more permissive areas. But still, so many people are talking about the daily oscillations, or the annual, the
Mm.
quarterly oscillations in home prices, as if supply is the dominant driver.
Yeah. I think it's also true that you might not get, on average, lower prices in more permissive areas if they're the places that have growing cities and higher income growth and all those sort of things.
I agree,
Uh,
but that would be their argument.
so,
That would be
yeah,
their
yeah, yeah.
retort to this.
Um, so I guess we're back to that tautology. Like, of course, if everyone sold their houses, the price would come down. That's how prices come down, when people are willing to accept a lower price to trade. Um, and I think the other important context here is that most home sales are existing houses. So when we think about setting the price through the trading of houses, most of the trading is existing homes. I think in the US, it's something like nearly 90% of trades are existing homes. And in Australia, it's closer to 78% or something like that.
Mhm.
Um, so the way to increase supply, as in willing sellers, is to, you know, get get owners of the 11 million existing homes in Australia to sell. But we don't want that, do we? Because after the financial crisis in the US, we actually had the owners of the existing homes sell, and we didn't like that either. So it's really this odd desire to solve housing on the supply side. And I think it just boils back to, wouldn't it be great if we were richer? Wouldn't it be great? I think that, like, if I'm, doing the AI thing of summarizing this thing, summarizing the argument, it's like, Wouldn't it be great if we had more of everything? Okay. Wouldn't it be, that just means we're richer. Wouldn't it be great if we're richer? Okay. We are richer. We're the richest we've ever been. And you still think it's a problem, right?
Mm.
Um, and I, you can make predictions on this. So yeah, it's July 2026. We can fast forward to July 2056. And if our model of the housing market's correct, we can make predictions like the ratio of income spent on rent by renter households will be within 1 percentage point of where it is today in 2056. Would you bet otherwise?
I no, I
Or
wouldn't.
you wouldn't, right? So we can know something about it. We could know that the average building area per person and the quality of fixtures, fittings, etc., will be better. Yeah, probably will. The number of homes per person might not change much at all because I don't think the number of homes is constraining the formation of households. We want to live with our kids and our spouses. So I would predict that's not going to change much either, unless there's a large demographic shift.
So
What
what
do
do
you
you
think?
think I
So,
agree with all of
so
that.
I think if
I'd
you
like
understand the market, you can predict this. And I predict people will complain about regulations as well. And we'll have cycles all the way up to 2056, and we'll repeat the same arguments. Now, I can make that prediction because had I made this prediction in 1915, when New South Wales had its first inquiry into the problem of rising rents in Sydney, I would have been right for 110 years by
mm.
saying that.
So
So I
what
think I'm pretty confident about my understanding of the market right now.
why are people so upset about home prices? Um, we've like established that what people are spending on housing today is no different from what they've always spent on housing. We've established that there's difficulty in affording any kind of housing for those at the very bottom.
Mm-hmm.
But the median person is spending what people have always spent on housing. But there's the perception that, and maybe this is a perception that, as we talked about, has been long running. But
Mm.
where does that come from?
Okay.
Why aren't people like the amount I spend on clothing or bananas or something else is too high? Why is there this recurring view that housing is extremely expensive and unaffordable?
Um, so apart from the social psychology aspect of getting swept up in what everyone else is talking about, and a lot of people do that, someone to start that wave has to look at the data. I suspect a lot of people just regret missing out getting 2% mortgages and buying a cheap house during COVID. And they
Mm.
feel like they've missed out because their mates did it and they didn't. So now they're complaining. And it's just our
Yeah.
pure instinct for fairness that you got a 2% mortgage and a $500,000 house. Now I have a 6% mortgage and your house is $1 million. And that was just 3 years ago, 4 years ago. How is that fair? And that's, I think, all there is to it.
But this
It's
this
not a,
view
yeah,
this view existed even before COVID, right? Like people in 2019 felt this as well. In 2018.
yeah, not so much. I
And
mean, prices were falling for 5 years. The newspaper headlines in Sydney were double whammy for investors, mortgages and prices and rents both falling over the year and stuff like that.
but like going back to your
Um,
Darwin quote, right? Like your Darwin quote suggests that people in the 1800s were
yeah,
upset about home prices. This is clearly like
I
a
think it comes in waves, right,
slowing.
with the cycle for sure, for
Yeah.
sure. And there are parts of the cycle like second half of the 90s, second half of the 2010s, where we kind of just forget about it a little, and then
Yeah,
it comes back again.
and I'm asking this question partly because I'm curious about your answer. I don't really know, but I think that it's all those things. I think it's partly that housing constitutes just a large proportion of people's total spending. It's like, roughly a third. That's a lot. People are like, that's too much.
Mm,
That feels like too much. And they've kind of always felt that way. Um,
yeah,
things that constitute a
yeah,
big portion of your budget, I think people tend to think is just generally a problem, even if it's been constant over time.
yeah. That's right. Look, I guess yeah, there weren't newspaper headlines about the affordability success of planning in 2017 to 2019, and yet that's the headlines are the opposite today.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think we have to maintain that long term perspective and not get swept up in what's the headline this year. And yeah, also just remember some of this simple economics. Housing is an asset. We spend the same share of income over time. Houses are bigger than ever. If your theory can't accommodate those things, then you need to sort of rethink if you've understood the market correctly for sure.
Let's so we've been talking for a couple of hours now. It's just kind of crazy. I feel like I have a lot more stuff I want to talk to you about, but um
Yeah.
let me ask you one last thing. What do you think about one of the pushbacks that your point of view, and mine often gets is what about Austin? People also talk about Auckland, which you've written a lot about, and Japan. But let's talk
Mm.
about something US centric and recent. The decline in home prices and rents in Austin is surely testament to the efficacy of upzoning in lowering the cost of housing. No?
So I need a name for this phenomenon, but there is a phenomenon where people put a chart on the internet and 90% of the chart disagrees with the point they're making. And there's a little blip somewhere that says they point to and go, see, I told you. And in Austin, you can get that chart, the last 20 years of rents, and you can see it rising, 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 booming, and then a little dip at the end. And they will say, see, Austin's the planning success. I'm like, you're looking at this, you know, 3 years out of 25 years and saying it's success. What about the other 20 years
Mm.
when it failed? Um, I guess this happens all the time. Like there's booms and busts in every city, right? And every boom comes with lots of construction. And if people lose money because rents are falling, they're going to stop building in Austin, and we will see the market adjust through low construction, low rents, fewer people moving there.
One of the, do you remember
Um,
the ProMap I was showing you the ranking feature? You can rank amongst the places you're
mm,
looking at, rank the top, three or five or ten. If you look at permits and go back in time, you can see permits rose quite a bit in Austin in 2020, 21, 22. Today, so it was one of the top ranking places in the top 10, certainly. Today, Austin is in the bottom 10. It's, permits
mm.
have collapsed. Um, so that might tell you something about what's happening there.
Whether it was structurally due to the planning regime or cyclical because Joe Rogan moved there and all his mates, or whatever the case may be. The Tokyo one I find interesting because people haven't caught up to the data on Tokyo. There is another housing boom in Japan right now, particularly in Tokyo. And if you look at quality adjusted apartment prices in Sydney and Tokyo, Tokyo's have gone up 60% in the last decade. Sydney's are flat or fallen, depending on which metric you use.
Hmm.
And so people like to go, oh, Tokyo solved housing. And I think they're also just getting fooled by the exchange rate and the difference in incomes. Because if you look in the last decade, Tokyo prices have boomed while interest rates in Japan have risen. And that's just all macroeconomics, like the return of inflation. And so we can expect, rather than falling rents as future income for the asset, we can expect rising rents as future income. So it justifies a much higher capital value, like any asset price today. So that's coming back to Japan. And so I suspect the story on Tokyo zoning will change. It will either be, let's forget about Tokyo, or Tokyo came up with some new planning rules in the 2010s that we didn't notice until now that caused that to happen. And I know that because this happened during the last uh, cycle, pre-financial crisis. There was a guy in New Zealand. Funny how there's all these American economists in New Zealand. And he would say, look to Germany to keep prices down because they have state controlled zoning, not city controlled zoning. And that's why their prices have been flat for 15 years since unification. Literally 2 years later, prices started booming in Germany and have for the last 12 years. So, and no one talks about that anymore. So, yeah, I suspect we'll see a change in the view of Tokyo pretty soon, and probably Austin, depending
I
on
think
what
it,
happens in the next 5 years.
yeah, I think it says something that the sort of the deregulation case comes back to these three places over and over again, all of which I think are really questionable. You've done a very credible peer-reviewed rebuttal of the Auckland case and their counterfactual, which I personally find very compelling. But people can read that in the great debate and see what you said about that. Um, Tokyo, Japan is a country that's had an aging population, deflation for 50 years, and a crashing stock market, and has a housing stock that has to be rebuilt every 5 years because of earthquakes. And Austin, I think, was like a developer's mistake. I think that they certainly didn't want to sit on a ton of inventory. That's not great for profit margins. That's not great for rents. I think that they regret having built so much. And so if you're looking at Austin as a case of, hey, look, this is how we can solve the housing crisis, it essentially entails tricking developers over and over again, which I don't think is a very credible or repeatable policy. I also think that, yeah, to your point about the sort of empirics around it, I'm not yet. I think that supply certainly played a part, but you know what predicts the drop in rents across the country on a metro level even better than permits? Work from home. Work from home is a
Mm.
better is a better explanatory of that relationship. I
So
have
you're
all kinds
saying
of problems.
the more people work from home, the more they're willing to spend on rent, and so when they have to go back to the office, they give up the extra room, they spend less. Is that? the relationship?
The more work from home is permitted, the less people needed to be in the center of cities, and the more
Uh,
those centers of cities, like we saw in New York City, uh,
yeah, right.
underperform in terms of prices and rents. Um,
Wow. Yeah, interesting. All right, I think we've had a long conversation here, and I think my audience knows what you're up to now, as is with the ProMap and the great debate. And I hope your audience understands some of my frustrations um, about the way we're having a housing debate in this country, which obviously prompted you to lay it all out on the website. Where should people follow you for my audience?
they can go to homeeconomics.us. You can find all my work there. Get in touch with me. That also will link you to my Substack, and we will link you to the Great Debate and to the map as well. And then for my readers, where can they find your stuff?
Fresheconomicthinking.com is the best place. That's my Substack. And I'm pretty active on Twitter. I still call it Twitter, Dr. Cameron Murray. Um, Find me there. Reach out on LinkedIn as well if you've got any questions, comments. There's a pretty active community of housing people on LinkedIn, would you believe, as well.
Good stuff. Thanks, Cam.
Great to chat.